Chapter 14. A Bombardment. Joe and Frank rushed to Chet's side. The three lifted the heavy iron box out of the rubble. "I'll help you open it," General Smith offered, as excited as the boys in anticipation of discovering Civil War gold. The officer picked up a flat stone, and with a mighty blow he knocked off one of the rusty hinges. Chet pulled up the lid as the others looked on, holding their breath in anticipation. Inside the box were a dozen horseshoes? "Gosh!" Chet cried, a pout of disappointment thrusting his lower lip forward. "Why would anybody put horseshoes in a strong box?" "Just for luck?" Joe grinned. "Maybe they were used as weights," Frank suggested hopefully. "Let's see if there's anything underneath them." Quickly lifting the horseshoes from the box, he found a piece of rawhide, and beneath it, the bottom of the box, there lay a sheaf of papers. "This was probably the box where the blacksmith kept his records," the general said as he read through the papers. There were bills for barrels of nails, bars of iron, and other materials used in the old shop. The last piece of paper read, "From Enfield Arms Company, Berkeley, England. 30 rifles, 100 cannonballs, taken to Arsenal." Seeing the word arsenal, General Smith's countenance took on a renewed interest. "So old Beauregard had his own personal arsenal. That's news to me." "There wasn't one on the blueprint," Joe commented. "It must have been one of the plantation secrets," Frank said. "I can understand why," General Smith reasoned. "Whoever controlled the arsenal controlled the plantation." "I think this is a hot clue," Frank spoke up. "The round designs on the message may have been representative of cannonballs. Those and the stacked rifles, it may have referred to the arsenal. If we could find it, we might discover the gold, or at least directions to it." "But where could the arsenal be?" Joe asked, puzzled. "Probably a long distance from the plantation buildings," the general reasoned, "and underground. In the first place, it would be dangerous to store explosive near the main buildings, and secondly, arms and ammunition would probably be in a secret spot. I'd suggest we go home and study the blueprints for clues. Also," he added, with a look at Chet, "Claude would not want us to be late for dinner." "General Smith," Chet said, beaming, "I'd like to be in your army." The boy picked up his camera. "But before we go, I want somebody to take a photo of me holding this clue." Chet posed by the box that he'd unearthed while Joe held the camera. "This is the last one on the film," Joe observed, "so you'd better not move." But just as he snapped the picture, Chet sneezed. General Smith shook his head as he smiled and led the group to the car. As they started off, Chet asked the officer where he could have his prints made up. "The general store in Centerville does its own developing. If we drop them off now, you could probably pick them up tonight." "That's great. I'll get some more film, too," Chet said. When they arrived home, Frank noticed a letter lying on the hall table. It was addressed to the Hardys. He opened it, frowned, and read aloud. "Hardy boys, clear out and go back to Bayport if you want to stay healthy. Kids who don't mind their own business end up in the graveyard." The message was unsigned. "Good night!" Joe exploded. Somebody doesn't like you," Chet stammered. "What's the postmark?" General Smith asked, taking the envelope. "Centerville, eh?" "Which means," Frank reasoned, "that Bush or his men haven't left town. Let's call the police and see if they've arrested anyone." The chief informed the general, who telephoned, that no one had returned to the museum, nor had anyone fitting the description of Randolph, Smiley, or Junior been picked up. "So they're still at large," General Smith said, reflectively, as he reported to the boys. "Now that this note has come, we'll have to get Bush before he gets us," Joe burst out. "But we've got to act fast," Frank added. I admire your spirit, General Smith smiled. Your plan of taking to the offensive is the best in the military tradition. An offense is sometimes the best defense. But we'll have to be doubly alert. I wish we knew what this Dr. Bush looks like, Frank mused. But all we know is that he has long legs and carries a black bag. And probably has a number of aliases, Joe added. I'd like to get a picture of the other half of him, Chet remarked. Which reminds me, I'll run into town after dinner and see if my prints are done. Later, leaving the Hardys and the General mulling over their plan of attack, Chet took the convertible and drove to Centerville. He parked in front of the town's general store and went inside. Finding his prints ready, Chet paid the bill. While waiting for the change, he glanced around the store. Everything from jelly beans to lawn chairs cluttered the establishment. Finally, Chet's eyes fell on a string of tiny red balls hanging from a wooden rack. "What are they?" he asked the clerk. "Atom crackers." "Atom crackers? Do you eat them?" "I should say not," replied the small man dryly. "If you ate those, they'd blow you inside out." "I get it," Chet said, laughing. "They're like firecrackers." "Only quite a bit louder," replied the man. "Want some?" "The 4th of July will be here soon." Chet beamed as he thought of scaring the Hardys with the powerful little charges. "I'll take a dozen." The man put 12 of the little red balls in a bag and handed it to Chet. As the boy went out the door, the shopkeeper warned him to be careful with them, and to get away quickly once he'd lighted the fuse. Intrigued by the thought of setting off a firecracker, Chet reached into the bag and pulled one out as soon as he reached the sidewalk. He'd not noticed that directly across the street was the Centerville police station. Grinning, Chet put the atom cracker on the sidewalk and lit the fuse. At the same time, he hopped back and lifted his hands to his ears. But as he did, the paper bag slipped from his fingers and landed directly on top of the sputtering fuse. In an instant, Centerville Square shook with a deafening explosion, like the town was under siege. Chet shuddered at every blast, hoping no more would go off, but the whole dozen sent their rapid-fire reverberations echoing and re-echoing through the little town. "Oh! Oh no!" Chet moaned, seeing people pop their heads out of the doors and windows. The exclamation was hardly off his lips when 3 policemen came storming from the station house. 2 others followed, which gave the boy the feeling that he was being ushered to his doom. "But I didn't mean to do anything," he said with outstretched hands. "Tell that to the chief." Chet was marched into the police station and led across the room to a desk perched on a dais. "This boy is responsible for that bombardment," one policeman bellowed. The chief, a stout man with 3 distinct chins, leaned forward and looked over his horn-rimmed glasses at the trembling boy. "This is a clear case of disturbing the peace. I'm going to throw you in jail," he shouted angrily. End of chapter 14.